Have you ever watched someone get humiliated in public and thought, just wait, this isn't over yet? I have, and the story I'm about to tell you today is exactly that kind of moment. The kind that stays with you. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about judging a person by the way they look. So stay with me, because this one is worth every second. The morning Raymond Osei walked into Claridge & Co. Fine dining. He was wearing a gray hoodie, scuffed boots, and carrying a paper bag from Tim Hortons. He was 29 years old, soft-spoken, slim build, dark eyes, the kind of face that looked younger than it was. A black man, third-generation Canadian, born in Ottawa and raised in the Glebe neighborhood where his grandmother still kept a vegetable garden in the backyard. He had driven 2.5 hours from Ottawa to Toronto that morning, and he hadn't bothered to change clothes. There was no reason to, in his mind. He owned the building. Not just the restaurant, the entire 6-story heritage property on King Street West that Claridge & Co. sat inside. He had inherited it 14 months ago when his grandfather, Raymond Osei, passed away. Raymond had bought the building in 1987 when nobody wanted old heritage stone on King Street. He had rented it, maintained it, paid the taxes, refused 3 developer buyouts, and left it to Raymond without ceremony or fanfare, the way some men leave their sons a good name. Raymond hadn't told anyone outside his family. He wasn't that kind of person. He had come to Toronto to meet with the building's property manager about a water intrusion issue on the 4th floor. He arrived 40 minutes early, and because he was hungry, and because the restaurant on the ground floor of his own building was somewhere he had never actually eaten, he walked in through the front door and stood at the host station. That was when Diane Fothergill noticed him. Diane Fothergill was 44 years old, the floor manager of Claridge & Co., a woman who had spent 16 years in the Toronto hospitality industry and had developed, over those years, an almost surgical instinct for what she called the right kind of clientele. She was tall, sharp-featured, with a blonde chignon that never moved and a manner that could freeze a room at 30 paces. She prided herself on her standards. She looked at Raymond standing at the host station, the hoodie, the Tim Hortons bag, the scuffed boots, and made a decision in under 4 seconds. She crossed the floor in 3 steps. "Can I help you?" she said, the way you say it when you mean the opposite. Raymond looked up. "Table for 1, please. Just breakfast." Diane's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. She glanced toward the dining room. The white tablecloths, the midweek regulars, the clusters of Bay Street professionals with their laptops and their flat whites. "We're fully booked," she said. Raymond looked around. He could see at least 4 empty tables from where he was standing. He pointed to one. "That one's empty. It's reserved." "Okay," he nodded slowly. "What about that one?" "Also reserved." He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with surprise, just a steady, quiet look, the kind that sees everything. "All of them?" "Yes," said Diane. "All of them. I'm sorry, she wasn't." He nodded again, picked up his Tim Hortons bag, and he walked back toward the entrance. He didn't leave. He sat down on the bench in the lobby just outside the restaurant's glass partition, still technically inside the building, pulled out his coffee and opened his phone. He had 40 minutes before his meeting. He would use them here. He had barely taken his first sip when Diane appeared again. She had followed him out. "Sir," she said, standing over him with her arms crossed, "this lobby is for restaurant guests." Raymond looked up. "It's a building lobby. It's adjacent to the restaurant. It's part of our space." He tilted his head slightly. "Is it? I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside." He took another sip of his coffee. "I'm fine here, thanks." Diane stiffened. She had spent 16 years moving people out of spaces they weren't supposed to be in, and she was not accustomed to being answered like that. Not by someone who looked the way he looked. She leaned in slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to make the power differential clear. "I'm not asking," she said quietly. "I'm telling you. You need to leave." Raymond looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very calmly, "Ma'am, with respect, I don't think that's your call to make. Something flickered across Diane's face. Not quite anger, not quite embarrassment, something in between. I'm the floor manager of this establishment, she said. I know, said Raymond. And I understand you're doing your job. I'll be out of your way in 40 minutes. Diane stared at him. Something about his tone, the absence of deference, the complete calm, irritated her in a way she couldn't name. She was used to people who looked like him either leaving immediately or raising their voice. This man did neither. He just sat there, looking at her like she was a minor inconvenience, and drank his coffee. She walked back inside. But she wasn't done. What happened next was witnessed by 6 people. A couple waiting for takeout orders near the host stand, a sous chef stepping out of the kitchen with a prep bin, a junior server named Priya Sandhu, 22 years old, 4 months on the job, still learning what kind of place she was working at, a delivery driver signing his clipboard near the service entrance, and Nolan Fitch, the building's property manager, who had arrived 8 minutes early for his meeting and was standing near the elevator bay with his briefcase. Nolan Fitch had been managing the Osei family's property portfolio for 11 years. He knew Raymond Osei very well. He had actually met Raymond when Raymond was 19 years old, when Kweku had brought him along to a lease renewal meeting and introduced him to Nolan with the words, "This is my grandson. He'll be the one you work with someday." Nolan had not yet made himself known. He was watching, and he was very still. Diane Fothergill came back through the restaurant and into the back service corridor. She was speaking to someone on the phone. Her assistant, it turned out, asking him to call building security. Then she went into the kitchen. She came back out 30 seconds later carrying a bucket, a gray plastic bucket, half full of mop water from the morning cleaning. Brown, soapy, the kind of water that smells like industrial floor solution and yesterday's grease. Priya Sandhu saw her coming and felt her stomach drop. "Diane," Priya said very quietly, "what are you doing?" "There's a vagrant sitting in the lobby," Diane said, refusing to leave. "This will move things along. He's not. He's just a person. He's not doing anything." Diane didn't answer. She pushed through the glass door into the lobby. Raymond looked up from his phone. He saw the bucket. He saw her face. He didn't move. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Diane Fothergill, floor manager of Claridge & Co. Fine Dining, lifted the gray plastic bucket and poured its entire contents over Raymond Osei. Dirty mop water, all of it. Over his head, his hoodie, his phone, his Tim Hortons cup. It splashed across the heritage marble floor, soaked through his jeans, filled his boots. The lobby went absolutely silent. Raymond sat completely still. He didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at her. Water was running down his face. His hoodie was soaked through. He held his phone in his wet hands and he looked at Diane Fothergill with the same quiet, steady expression he'd been wearing since she first walked up to him at the host station. Like she had done exactly what he expected. Like this changed nothing. Priya Sandhu had followed Diane into the lobby and was standing in the doorway. She had her hands over her mouth. "Oh my God," she said. "Diane, oh my God." Diane set the bucket down. She smoothed her jacket. She looked at Raymond and said, with complete composure, "Now you have a reason to leave." Raymond blinked once. Then he looked down at his phone. It was still on. He opened his contacts, found a name, and made a call. 3 rings. "Hey," said the voice on the other end. "I'm actually right outside, just coming up." Raymond said, "Can you come to the lobby? There's a situation." Nolan Fitch was 61 years old, heavy-set, with a gray beard and the steady manner of a man who had negotiated commercial leases for 4 decades. He came around the elevator bay with his briefcase and stopped when he saw Raymond. He looked at the bucket on the floor, the water pooling on the marble, Raymond, dripping, sitting on the bench with perfect composure. Then he looked at Diane Fothergill. "I'm sorry," Nolan said. "What happened here?" Diane turned to him. "And you are?" "Nolan Fitch. I'm the property manager for this building." Something shifted in Diane's face. A small thing, just a fraction of a second, but Priya caught it from the doorway. "There was a trespasser in the lobby," Diane said. I asked him several times to leave. He refused. Nolan looked at Raymond. Raymond looked back at him, still calm, still dripping. "This is Raymond Osei," Nolan said. "He's the owner of this building." The lobby went so quiet that you could hear the street outside. Diane blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The owner," Nolan repeated. He set his briefcase down and opened it, withdrew a folder, and placed it on the bench beside Raymond. "We have a meeting this morning, property management review. Raymond is the registered owner of this property. Has been for 14 months. Diane stared at Raymond. Raymond reached up and wiped water from his face with the back of his hand. He looked at her the way you look at someone you already knew was going to do exactly what they did. 14 months, he said quietly, and this is the first time I've come in for breakfast. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The couple near the host stand were staring. The delivery driver had stopped signing his clipboard. Priya Sandhu had taken her hands from her mouth and was standing very still. "I want to be clear," Raymond said, and his voice was still completely even. "I'm not angry. I've dealt with this my whole life. But I want you to understand what you just did. Not to a stranger, to me." He stood up. He was soaking wet. He stood up like it was nothing. He looked at Diane for a long moment, then he turned to Nolan. "Let's get our meeting started. I'd like to get some dry clothes from my car first." He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He waited. He didn't look back. Diane Fothergill was suspended without pay within the hour. It happened fast. The way things only happen fast when the person at the top of the org chart is involved. The restaurant's managing director, a woman named Constance Beaumont Fairweather, who had leased the Claridge & Co. space from the Osei family for 9 years, received a call from Nolan Fitch at 9:47 in the morning. By 10:15, she was in the lobby herself, speaking with Raymond in dry clothes he'd retrieved from his overnight bag. Constance Beaumont Fairweather was 62 years old, white-haired and precise, a woman who had built her reputation in Toronto's food scene on the principle that her restaurants welcomed everyone. She had shaken hands with premiers and premiers' assistants and university students and retired teachers, and she treated them all exactly the same way. She was visibly shaken. "I am so deeply sorry," she said. "I have no words." "You don't need words," Raymond said. "I need to know what happens next." What happened next was this. Diane Fothergill was removed from the premises. A formal investigation into the incident was opened. Priya Sandhu gave a full witness account to both management and, later, to police. 2 other witnesses came forward independently. An assault complaint was filed. Pouring liquid on a person without consent, even dirty mop water, is assault under Canadian law. Diane Fothergill was charged. The story was picked up by 3 Toronto media outlets by the following Thursday. By Friday, it was national. The comment section of every article said the same things, over and over again. This happens every day. Most of the time, there's no property manager in the lobby. Most of the time, nobody finds out. Raymond knew that. He had always known that. He gave one interview to CBC Toronto. He sat in a coffee shop a few blocks from the building, in a clean gray hoodie not unlike the one that had been ruined, and he said this, "I'm not telling this story because I'm special. I'm telling it because I'm not. Because the same thing happens to people who don't own the building, and nobody asks what happened to them." That quote ran everywhere. Diane Fothergill's trial took 7 months. She was found guilty of common assault. She received a conditional discharge and was required to complete anti-bias sensitivity training, an outcome that many people found insufficient, that sparked significant public debate about whether courts took racially motivated harassment seriously enough. Raymond publicly stated that he accepted the court's decision, that his point had never been about punishment, that it had been about visibility. He kept the building. He renewed Claridge & Co.'s lease at Constance's request, and at Constance's own initiative, the restaurant introduced a new staff training program, one of the first of its kind in Toronto, focused on unconscious bias and customer dignity across all demographics. Priya Sandhu, the junior server who had tried to stop Diane, was promoted. Raymond came back to Claridge & Co. for breakfast exactly 1 year later. He sat at a corner table by the window, in the same gray hoodie. He ordered eggs Benedict and a coffee. Nobody said a word about what he was wearing. You know, when I first heard this story, I sat with it for a long time. Because the part that stays with me, the part I keep coming back to, isn't the moment the twist was revealed. It isn't the look on Diane's face when she found out who Raymond was. It's Raymond, sitting there, soaking wet, perfectly still, not because he had to be calm, but because he chose to be. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to prove anything in that moment. He knew exactly who he was, and no bucket of dirty water was going to change that. And here's the thing I want you to think about today. Most people who get treated the way Raymond was treated, in lobbies, in restaurants, in shops, in offices all across this country, they don't own the building. They never get the public moment. Nobody films it. Nobody investigates it. It just happens, and they go home and they carry it. That's what Raymond said in that CBC interview, and he was right. This story isn't really about a twist ending. It's about what happens every day to people who aren't the plot twist. So if you've ever been that person, if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be, I want you to know, I see you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, share it. Leave a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me if you've ever been judged by how you look and what happened, because your story matters too. And if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and stick around. There are more stories like this one coming. Stories about dignity and justice and the people who hold on to both even when someone tries to take them away. I'll see you in the next one.